Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are looking at a region of your body that you probably, well, actively avoid thinking about. But it might actually be holding on to every bit of stress, fear, and control in your life.
Yeah, that is a massive claim,
Yeah.
but the source material really backs it up.
Right. And we know you are the kind of listener who loves getting into the weeds, someone who is always looking for those thorough, aha moments that completely shift your perspective. And our mission today is to explore the literal and psychological mechanics of letting go. We are unpacking a fascinating, albeit shockingly titled, source text called Asshole Healing.
The title is undeniably provocative. I mean, it catches your attention. But the text itself actually offers a deeply respectful, scientific, and psychological breakdown of a very complex biological intersection.
We are definitely going way past the basic idea of plumbing here. This text argues that the anal region is actually one of the densest convergence points in the human body for survival, for control, for shame, and for release.
Exactly. And we're going to explore how your body literally and metaphorically negotiates what stays and what is let go.
Okay, let's unpack this. I think we all easily understand how stress affects our upper body. You sit in awful traffic or you have a tense meeting at work and you suddenly realize your jaw is completely clenched.
Oh, yeah, or your shoulders are practically touching your ears.
Right. We readily accept that mental stress equals muscular tension up there, but I rarely, if ever, apply that same logic to the other end of the digestive tract.
What's fascinating here is that the mechanics down there operate on those exact same physical principles, but with an incredibly sophisticated neural network. We are looking at the direct influence of the gut-brain axis.
So it's not just a mechanical flap.
Not at all. The internal and external anal sphincters are not passive structures. They aren't just inanimate floodgates waiting to be pushed open. They are governed by highly sensitive nerve networks tied directly to your autonomic nervous system.
And that's heavily influenced by the vagus nerve, right? Meaning the autopilot system, the system running our heartbeat and breathing without us having to consciously schedule it.
Precisely. Within that autopilot, your body constantly toggles between two states. You have the sympathetic state, which is your fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic state, which is rest and digest.
Okay, so how does that translate down below?
And in the pelvic floor and anal region, a sympathetic state translates into holding, clenching, and guarding. It is a biological protective mechanism. The parasympathetic state translates to softening and releasing.
So the source text's fundamental rule that fear tightens and safety releases is a literal anatomical function.
It's completely literal, yeah.
If I'm stressed about a looming financial deadline, my body doesn't differentiate between an overflowing email inbox and a physical predator. It just hits the sympathetic switch.
The nervous system is remarkably literal like that. It reads your racing thoughts or your hurried pace as an environmental threat. Those sphincters, listening to the chemical signals of stress cascading through your body, well, they tighten up to secure the perimeter.
Because it thinks we're in danger.
Right. The body perceives that it is not safe to be vulnerable. And elimination is, biologically speaking, a highly vulnerable state.
If our baseline biological design is to relax when we are safe, I'm trying to figure out when we actually learn to tense up. Like, are we born bracing for impact, or is this something society trains into us the moment we can walk?
This brings us to early childhood development, which the source text explores in quite a bit of depth. Consider the universal process of toilet training.
Oh man, the defining battleground of toddlerhood.
Yeah, it really is. And we usually treat it as a straightforward mechanical milestone, like learning to tie your shoes. But psychologically, it is often a child's very first negotiation of power and bodily autonomy with an external authority.
Interesting. Because before that, it's just instinct.
Exactly. Before toilet training, elimination is entirely driven by an internal physical cue. The body feels pressure, the body releases. It is a closed loop of trust between the organ and the brain.
And then we step in as adults and say, well, hold on. You have to control this fundamental bodily function on my schedule and in this specific room. We basically demand that they sever that closed loop.
We demand that the child intentionally override their autonomic nervous system. If that early developmental process is heavily pressured, if it's inconsistent, or if it involves shaming the child for accidents, the nervous system starts encoding new defensive baseline patterns.
It changes the whole dynamic.
It does. The act of elimination shifts from being an internal biological response to an external performance for authority. Control over the physical body becomes deeply linked to discipline, to adult approval, or to avoiding shame.
Let me push back for a second just to play devil's advocate for you listening. Are we saying that everyone is walking around with unresolved potty training trauma that is actively dictating their adult physical health? Because that feels a bit extreme.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is less about a capitalized drama and more about the simple, quiet conditioning of the nervous system. The body takes meticulous notes.
So it remembers the pressure.
Yes. If the early environment demands tightness instead of trust, or withholding instead of natural flow, the body adapts by establishing a hypervigilant baseline in the pelvic floor. It forgets how to be neutral.
It essentially treats going to the bathroom like a test it has to pass.
And the physiological consequences of that chronic, low-grade tension are staggering. Adults experience chronic constipation, a persistent feeling of incomplete evacuation, and widespread pelvic floor dysfunction.
The text highlights a particularly complex outcome here, something called paradoxical contraction. Wait, paradoxical, meaning the body is doing the exact opposite of what you were consciously telling it to do.
That is a perfect summary. When a person sits down with the conscious intention to eliminate, their brain sends a go signal. But the nervous system's deeply learned protective pattern senses the pressure to perform, and it overrides the conscious brain.
Oh, wow. So it actively fights you.
Yes, the muscles actively clench against the conscious effort. You find yourself caught in this neurological tug-of-war. The brain perceives the demand to produce as a threat, triggering the sympathetic response to clamp down tighter.
I love a good analogy, and this paradoxical contraction reminds me of a Chinese finger trap. If you put your fingers in and pull as hard as you can, trying to force a release, the woven fibers just clamp down tighter.
That is exactly how it works.
The harder you pull, the more trapped you become. The only way to get out is to stop pulling, soften your approach, and gently push inward.
That beautifully illustrates the mechanics at play, and it explains why our standard everyday medical approaches to this region often fall completely short. We frequently encounter what the source calls the diet fallacy.
Which is when we treat the digestive tract like a clogged pipe under the kitchen sink. We just pour more water down it, add a bunch of fibrous roughage, maybe throw in some magnesium or a harsh laxative, and we just expect the pressure to clear the blockage.
Right, and those dietary elements are absolutely foundational for digestion. However, the text argues they are woefully insufficient if the body remains locked in a sympathetic, guarded state.
Because the door is still locked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are essentially trying to ram roughage through a locked door. The pelvic floor is not a passive pipe. It is active muscle tissue responding to safety cues.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You cannot pry a tightly clenched fist or system open with brute force or sheer volume without causing damage, pain, or just further resistance.
No, you really can't.
The entire paradigm has to shift. We have to stop asking, how do I forcefully make this release? And start asking, what conditions do I need to create to allow this system to feel safe enough to open?
Because the holding pattern is not a mechanical flaw. It is a highly effective, intelligent protective measure by the body.
It's doing its job.
Exactly. The nervous system simply does not want to become vulnerable in an environment it perceives as demanding or unstable. Healing requires signaling to the deepest layers of your neurology that the coast is genuinely clear.
So how do we actually send that coast is clear signal? I mean, we can't exactly send a memo down to the vagus nerve and ask it to stand down.
Well, we communicate through biomechanics and environment. The source text outlines 5 practical layers or interventions, and the first one starts with our physical alignment.
Right, our posture.
Biomechanically, the human body was not designed to eliminate while sitting at a 90-degree angle, which is the standard for modern toilets.
We are essentially folding ourselves into a chair.
Which creates a severe kink in the system. There is a specific muscle called the puborectalis muscle. It acts like a muscular sling wrapped right around the rectum.
Okay, a sling.
When you stand or sit at a 90-degree angle, that sling is pulled tight, physically choking off the pathway. It is a natural continence mechanism so we don't leak while walking around our daily lives.
But when you alter your posture,
When you elevate your knees above your hips, say by putting your feet on a specialized stool, that puborectalis sling finally relaxes.
it just lets go.
Yes, the rectum straightens out. You provide mechanical support for release, meaning the muscles no longer have to strain against their own anatomy.
You are removing a physical roadblock. But it seems like removing that physical kink naturally ties into removing the psychological pressure, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Because if you are sitting at 90 degrees, fighting your own anatomy, you inevitably start pushing or straining, which triggers that Chinese finger trap effect we just talked about.
Yes, the physical and psychological are entirely intertwined here. That mechanical strain breeds urgency, which activates those paradoxical control patterns.
So that brings us to the next layer, removing regency.
Right. The body responds infinitely better to permission than to a ticking clock. Yeah. Taking the timeline off the table, removing the pressure to hurry up and go, fundamentally changes the nervous system's threat assessment.
And to give the body that true permission, we have to look at the psychological baggage we carry into the bathroom. The text touches heavily on sensory neutrality.
Yes, this is the fourth layer.
I imagine this goes back to that childhood conditioning where we learn to view this specific bodily function as dirty or taboo.
Inherently, biology doesn't have a moral compass. We humans are the ones assigning labels of good or bad to a completely neutral bodily function.
Right, the body's just doing its thing.
When we carry disgust, embarrassment, or shame about our own biology, our nervous system stays engaged. It guards the area because we have labeled the act as somehow wrong.
So we have to drop the labels.
Cultivating a neutral perception, viewing it purely as standard cellular waste management, allows the nervous system to disengage that unnecessary guarding.
It is incredibly hard to feel safe if your brain is constantly telling you that what your body is doing is disgusting. But even if you fix your posture and you drop the shame, you still have to deal with the actual nervous system regulation in the moment.
The physical signaling of safety.
Right. And the source leans heavily on the breath here as a tool for regulation.
The connection between respiration and the pelvic floor is beautifully elegant. Think of your torso as a cylinder. The diaphragm is the roof of the cylinder, and the pelvic floor is the basement.
Oh, that is a brilliant visual.
When you take a deep, slow breath in, your lungs expand, pushing the diaphragm down. That pressure travels through the cylinder, and the pelvic floor gently expands and drops downward to accommodate it.
They completely mirror each other.
Yes, and when you exhale, they both naturally rise back up.
So if I am stressed out, taking shallow, tight little chest breaths,
Your diaphragm barely moves, which means your pelvic floor remains tight and frozen. By consciously slowing your breathing, especially extending the exhale, you send a biological signal of safety via the vagus nerve.
it literally massages the pelvic floor into a softer, more receptive state.
Exactly. And the final piece of the puzzle, the fifth layer, to keep that nervous system calm, is consistency. The body loves a predictable rhythm.
Like having a schedule.
Circadian rhythms govern much more than just our sleep cycles. Predictable cycles of eating, hydrating, and resting provide profound structural safety.
Because it knows what's coming.
If your body never knows when the next meal or the next moment of rest is coming, it defaults to a hoarding state. Irregularity reinforces instability. This raises an important question, really, about how modern society actively fights against our body's natural baseline.
Looking at all this together, the unnatural 90-degree toilets, the constant rushing, the shallow breathing from stress, the cultural shame, the irregular eating patterns, it becomes glaringly obvious. We are basically living in a culture that tells our pelvic floor to brace for impact 24 hours a day.
It is the perfect storm for chronic tension. Our modern environment is fundamentally at odds with our biological requirements for letting go.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Because with all this talk of deep psychology, childhood conditioning, and physical mirroring, it is very tempting to swing the pendulum all the way to the other side.
It is, yeah.
It's tempting to start treating every minor stomachache as a profound emotional crisis.
And the source text explicitly warns against falling into that trap.
Yeah.
We must balance the symbolic with the physical.
The text does pose some heavy symbolic questions like, what are you keeping past its usefulness? Or, where is control replacing trust in your life? But we can't over-spiritualize a biological process.
Exactly.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and sometimes constipation is simply because you ate an entire block of cheese and haven't had a glass of water in 2 days.
Right. The text states clearly, clarity comes from integration, not exaggeration. Not every physical irregularity is a manifestation of deep trauma.
It's still biology.
Your body is physical matter responding to physics, chemistry, diet, and movement.
So we integrate the psychological awareness with basic, grounded physical care. We don't need to turn every trip to the bathroom into a deep psychoanalysis session.
No, not at all. The ultimate goal, as defined by the text, is actually incredibly simple. A balanced system. True healing in this region is characterized by a return to ease.
Just ease.
When the system is balanced, the process of elimination is quiet.
Quiet. meaning it doesn't require intense thought, forced physical effort, or a heavy emotional charge.
Right, it just happens. And your body seamlessly moves on to the next thing.
The sign of healing isn't some dramatic, cathartic breakthrough. It's just quiet ease.
Achieved by understanding that the body is simply waiting for the signal that it is safe enough to let go.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to take away today. We spent this deep dive exploring how intelligent our bodies really are, how they literally translate our subconscious need for control and safety into the invisible tension of our deepest muscles.
It really is incredible.
So, if your body is constantly taking meticulous notes on your environment, take a moment today to observe the micro tensions in your own physical space. What subtle external pressures in your daily life, maybe an email notification, rushing clock, an unspoken expectation, are causing you to unknowingly hold your breath, clench your muscles, and quietly dictate your physical health without you even realizing it? Where can you introduce a little more ease? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.